Today we are talking about Soul Eater and some other items that revolve around similar stats. Soul Eater is getting a buff in patch 5.3. Soul Eater struggles to get online quickly enough and lacks a punch when fully upgraded. We are reducing the stacks needed to evolve Soul Eater while increasing the physical power it gains from being evolved. So far so good. The changes in detail are decreased stacks needed from 100 to 75, increased bonus physical power on evolved item from 10 to 20. Soul Eater now provides 60 physical power when fully evolved, up from 50. That puts Soul Eater in a very interesting spot. Previously, with 50 power, it wasn't far off from other items with cooldown reduction that typically have 40 power but sometimes have penetration on top of that, kinda ending up around similar damage numbers. 60 power sets it apart a little bit more, bringing it closer to the highest power item with cooldown reduction in the game being Transcendence, with no other item being competition anymore. So if you want a lot of power and CDR, Soul Eater has both. But Soul Eater also has other stats, and that makes it so interesting and puts it in such a odd place. Outside of those stats, Soul Eater comes with 200 flat mana, just for some more ability use, 10% lifesteal, and when fully stacked, 10% ability lifesteal as well. This ability lifesteal doesn't proc on everything, it doesn't proc on pets, but it does proc on AoE abilities for 10%. Typically on mages, if you have lifesteal, you have that multiplier of 0.33, meaning you only get 33% of the lifesteal you would normally have in an AoE ability. But that's not the case for Soul Eater. So if you hit a large amount of enemies with an AoE ability, you will still get a full lifesteal for each of them. There are some conditions though. On one hand, if a target dies, you only get lifesteal for the amount of damage you dealt before they died. Meaning if you deal 500 damage but they only have 240 health left, you're only gonna get healed for the 10% of that 240 health. Furthermore, comma values are rounded down, and you're obviously affected by anti-heal as anything else. In regards to the stacking mechanic, Soul Eater is actually unique. It is definitely the easiest stacking way in the game, because it stacks as long as anything around you dies. You don't need to have the kill, you can just have an assist on it, and you even get extra points for guards or bigger jungle monsters and stuff like that dying, so you get 5 stacks instead for that. This item is quickly stacked no matter where you are, so you will have the effect for the full stacks, the maximum power and the extra ability lifesteal very quickly, pretty much quicker than any other stacking item, even though it requires some more stacks, just because the stacks are so easily collected. That also means that stacking wise, this item can literally be purchased in any role. That wouldn't be a downside if you're jungling, if you're supporting, you could always get the stacks, but obviously not everyone gets the same benefit out of Soul Eater. Before we talk more about the specifics, let's throw Soul Eater in the arena with some other similar items. The items that I'm using here are Soul Eater, Transcendence, Devourer's Gauntlet, Bloodforge, and RC. 3 of them are obvious, they're there because they have lifesteal as well, and the other one because it has power and cooldown reduction. The mixed stats again are what make Soul Eater hard to place here. Are you using it as a high power damage item with a little bit of cooldown reduction on top of that? Then you're comparing it to Transcendence. Are you using it as your primary lifesteal item? Then you're comparing it to Devos. Are you using it as maybe a secondary lifesteal item or a late game power lifesteal item? Then you're comparing to Bloodforge. So let's begin. Unstacked Soul Eater has 40 power, Transcendence has 35, but it already has the mana scaling, so it will effectively have more already. But fully stacked, with Soul Eater we're talking about 60 power, with Transcendence it's somewhere around 96.5 at level 20, assuming that you have around 1000 mana. Depends on the guard and their items, but we can speak roughly around 96 to 100 here. Both have 10% cooldown reduction. Transcendence comes with 300 mana, Soul Eater only with 200, but Transcendence also has the 6 MP5 on top of that. So both will allow you to roam a little bit or use your mana for abilities a little bit, but in the long run Transcendence offers more, especially because stacked, Transcendence provides you with a lot more mana. Soul Eater, in return, gets the ability lifesteal passive and the base lifesteal. Just based on these stats, I will say that I think most ability users generally benefit more from Transcendence. It's a little more expensive, 300 extra gold, and it takes a little longer to stack in most situations, but the extra power that you can get out of it is so impactful for high scaling guards The extra mana means that you can use more abilities, especially during earlier stages of the game, and the cooldown reduction on both is equal. So the only thing that it doesn't offer is the lifesteal, and the lifesteal on Soul Eater is not exactly insanely high. So you either have to be specifically looking for a hybrid option because you feel like raw power alone is not going to do it, or you're going to prefer Transcendence and build Soul Eater as a secondary high power item in the build, depending on what your purpose with that build is. If you have a very high scaling god, then the more power you have, the better, and you can easily combine the two as well, especially because Soul Eater is so easy to stack. Devour's Gauntlet, on the other hand, is another story. Devour's Gauntlet costs the same, both 2,300. Devour's starts at 30 power, so less base power, and caps out at 65 power. Almost the same as Soul Eater, 5 extra power, but really not that significant, especially when Soul Eater is stacked so much earlier. So with Soul Eater, you will definitely build up pressure in lane earlier, you have more clear potential and all that kind of stuff just because you have that extra power for a fair bit of time until Devour's is stacked. On the other hand, Devour's comes with up to 24% lifesteal. They both start at 10%, but the 14% difference that Devour's accumulates over time can be very impactful. Some gods, however, just benefit more from cooldown reduction, and for them, I think Soul Eater is a very valid option now. If you really want to go into some sort of lifesteal, but you're gonna use abilities a lot until late game, then I think Soul Eater has its place there. And that brings us to Bloodforge. If you're really looking for a high power, ability focused hunter, for example, and you want to maximize your power while also having some lifesteal on the side, then Bloodforge can easily kind of compensate for the deficit that you would create with Devils. Now, Bloodforge is a late game item, it's super expensive with 2,800 gold, but it offers 75 power right off the bat, so another huge power chunk, and it gives you 15% lifesteal. Combining Soul Eater and Bloodforge allows you to have pretty much the same lifesteal as Devils. Otherwise, I would say Soul Eater is now the more interesting choice than Bloodforge. It has a little bit less base lifesteal and it doesn't have a strange passive like Bloodforge, but I think Bloodforge's passive is often overrated and only really utilized effectively by a few select gods, whereas on the other hand, Soul Eater's CDR is always useful, the extra mana is helpful in early game, and the ability lifesteal is something that is still interesting, and it's also a whole lot cheaper. You can just invest that 500 gold into your next power item, and you're kind of making up for that deficit as well. And last but not least, there is Asi. Now, Asi is cheaper, has very different stats, so it's hardly comparable. The thing is that Asi can kind of fulfill the same niche as Bloodforge and compensate for that little less lifesteal that you have compared to Devils, kind of make up for that and actually make your lifesteal higher. If you combine Soul Eater and Asi, you have that little bit of flat pen that you want, you have the power that you want, you have a little bit of attack speed that you want, and if you fall below your health threshold of 35%, you also get an extra 25% lifesteal. So you will definitely out-heal somebody with Devils, even at full stacks when you have fully stacked Soul Eater and Asi. That on the other hand means that somebody who has a fully stacked Devils and Asi will still out-heal you. So I do think there are now niche builds where it could work. So a final build could be something like Soul Eater, and then your boots, and then maybe Crusher to get that attack speed as well as penetration. Then Concise, because you want to have that as some AA damage in combination with a Bloodforge, and then an Odysseus bow to get some more attack speed benefits as well. Or just something that is more power focused, or something that is more focused around ability damage only, like a Skadi build that literally implements Soul Eater very early and Trance as well, and then just goes for raw pen and power items all the way. But the question is, does the god benefit enough from the passive to make it worth considering Soul Eater, or is the CDR and power enough for that god with that little bit of lifesteal? In that regard, it's worth keeping in mind that anti-heal strongly counters this item, so if you want to trade someone with brawlers, you probably need brawlers. Now, Soul Eater and brawlers are pretty synergistic. Power, pen, CDR, and everything else, the passive effects, should work pretty decently together, so that shouldn't be an issue, but the question is, what do you do if you still need attack speed in your build and similar things like that, that kind of make it a bit problematic. But even outside the hunter role, there are definitely uses for this. The high power with CDR is something that could definitely be made use of by certain junglers. Question is, how much do they get out of the passive, and wouldn't they be better off just building something like Jones with more CDR, or another item that benefits them more for early burst? Because stacking is still stacking after all. Likewise, this item in theory should work decently for a solo laner in terms of the lane sustain. used to be compared to Gladiator's Shield once upon a time, but Gladiator's Shield got changed a lot since and is not as effective for many gods anymore. And as such, they kind of have their individual niche now. The problem is that in solo you will rarely ever see anyone invest into non-defensive items that are revolving around power or lifesteal, because they're typically much easier to counter and not as effective at certain stages when you really want them. So it would really require an entire change of the solo meta for this to work. Maybe for the outlier solo assassin, but that's pretty much about all I can think of. There are a variety of gods that could make use of this item somehow, but often there are just better choices. For example, Susano has enough AoE in his kit to really utilize the passive, but on Susano you're just often looking for more pen and power, which begs the question if you can fit it in. If you can, good. I think Susano would be a great character for this, and a fully charged Tornado going through a team fight with Soul Eater should result in massive heals, especially if there's somehow a minion wave in between too. Likewise, Houyi's AoE ultimate should definitely be able to make use of it in team fights. Kukulin, as much as it would be weird to somehow fit it on his character, should definitely be able to make great use of it with multiple AoE abilities and multiple abilities that go through various targets. He could even proc it from his 2 as far as I understand it. And if you've ever seen the damage values of a Kukulin at the end of the game, no matter what he was building, then you will know how impactful that is. There are some other gods where I'm not so sure, like Chiron or Medusa, that could possibly make use of this item, and many that should maybe get some use out of it to some degree, like Guan Yu, Amaterasu, Ratatoska, Thanatos, or Thor. Maybe even Achilles, because he benefits from high power items too, as he has that percentage power increase in his 2. If you combine that double heal, then that should also result in decent values. Many of these gods would have to be played in unusual roles like jungle to make full use of that build, but it could be possible. Overall, I think that Soul Eater is not a bad item anymore, but rather that the god that can make excellent use out of its utility, out of its effect, doesn't exist yet. If there was a physical equivalent to Nuwa who could hit all targets on the map with their ultimate at the same time, which wouldn't in itself be broken, that could easily be very, very scary in combination with Soul Eater. If that person went below half health, they would just ult and just heal back up for a massive amount. So I think Soul Eater is worth toying around with, especially as an ADC, but also in the jungle. But the biggest impact of it is yet to be seen if there's a god released that utilizes the passive better than the ones we have so far. Maybe I'm overlooking a god, maybe there's somebody that you have in mind that you think would make great use of this. If that's the case, let me know in the comments down below. And with that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was insightful and interesting. If you enjoyed this and you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.